Hi, I'm Jaime Kuzmiak, and this is my outreach project for Ethnic Studies 160. My topic is how media has shaped discrimination against Latinx people and how it makes people view their own identity. I chose to do this, one, because I found the media really interesting and just how there's so many ways that media has been made and produced and transmitted throughout time. And I also decided to use a form of media and making a video to further enhance that argument. So let's get into it. So I first wanted to use a term for media and just make a basic definition of it. So I'm using media to refer to social media, news, and politics all together. And I'm taking that from the Merriam-Webster definition of media being a medium of cultivation, conveyance, or expression. So basically, any way that you can get information from one person to the other. Um, I am including politics in this because when we were reading Latino USA, a cartoon history, during colonialization times, politics was a huge and pretty much the only way of communicating information from one person to another. So, why is it important? It's important because the colonization of Latinx people started about 600 years ago, 500 years ago, in the 15th century, which was basically just a way to oppress them, to racially discriminate against them, and cause violence to Latinx cultures. And in doing that, it erased the culture that shaped them throughout time, and it even happens today. Um, in 1819, Florida was taken from Spain by early Americans, and this is just one of many, many examples of colonization throughout America, or what we now call America. And then during wars and oppression, US made sure to use the media to gain as much public support as possible, even claiming that Mexicans during the Mexican American War were violent, lazy drunks, and good for nothings, shaping how Americans saw Mexicans, even when they weren't face to face with them in the war. And that's all because of how the media was showing them and how it was conveying their information. So, as we all know, the media does lie, and it's very biased in the opinions and the perspectives that it has, and usually those perspectives are from one side. I mean, we see in modern times with things like politics how there's always the media always leans towards the right or the left. There are very few parties that are, or very few media places that are very in the middle. And that just ties into this idea that throughout time there's always been a bias or an opinion. So even if they don't mean to lie, the media will intentionally or unintentionally use the information that they have to gain people and gain trust and information. So that's why it's so important to understand the information you've been given, and if the things you are researching and know about are true or not. Because if you can't do that, you can't make an informed decision on what your opinions are on these topics. So when the media is putting Latinx communities in these discriminatory topics, is that the full story, or is that just what the media wants us to hear? So going off of that, false information that the media produces does lead to these things like oppression, racism, hatred, and violence, especially for these minority communities. So let's start in the early 1900s, where silent films and television were very prominent, and in that time, a lot of Latinx people were used as the stereotypical character, a lot of villains, a lot of bad characters, pirates. It was very rare that they were ever playing a lead role or a good role. And then throughout time, that did start to change a little bit. They started getting lead roles, but it was still all in silent film. And then once Hollywood started producing talking films, films that weren't silent, these very few people from the Latinx communities that had lead roles and were becoming very good actors were now demoted or fired, just because of their accents. Because of their accents, the way they spoke, their dialects. It concerned the producers because the stereotype at that time was a white male or a white female with an American accent playing those roles. So instead of changing the norm, they just kicked them out. So these are the type of stereotypes that are inherently racist and are just harming people more than they're helping. So once they were kicked out and demoted, they were completely erased from the scope of Hollywood for some time, which was very problematic because now the media isn't seeing them in these films at all. They don't know what to think, they don't know how to think in these film and television types of settings. Now they only have politics or only have the news. So it completely wiped them from film and television altogether for a good chunk of years. So going into politics, protest and punishment, one of the biggest things I thought about was El Movimiento and the Unified Farm Workers Movement. So the politics behind that was the Chicano movement demanded civil rights, reforms in education and labor protection because they were treated so unfairly throughout government laws and political figures. So throughout hundreds of years, they were just always oppressed and always treated poorly just because of the color of their skin and who they were and their culture. And so they started to fight back. And one of the ways of fighting back on that was a protest, which one of the largest ones was the Unified Farm Workers Movement. As spoken about in the film that we watched, Dolores, they boycotted, they organized strikes for all Chicanx farm workers, Latinx farm workers, to get better pay, better everything. One of the biggest things they did was the grape strike. And what was kind of crazy about the grape strike to me was that these politicians and governors, instead of actually acknowledging these things, just went and bought so many grapes to like backtrack all the work that these people had done just because they could afford to. And one of the big things was how they were punished for these strikes and boycotts and protests. So there was unnecessary violence by law enforcement, there was unlawful arrests, and just overall more surveillance over Latinx communities, which, in other words, is just racism, because now law enforcement is looking for darker skinned people, brown people, because they think they're dangerous, even though many of them weren't even in the protests. So because of this, these all led to a violent view of Latinx or Chicanx people throughout America, which was already happening, so it's just worse. Next was the banning of ethnic studies in schools. So House Bill 2281 banned ethnic studies programs in public schools, which was spoken about in the film that we watched, Precious Knowledge. Basically, the government claimed that these programs promoted racial solidarity, violence, and resentment towards America. And they also claim that cultural education in America is not America's culture, which isn't true because they were this education was here before America took over what we now call America, and they were using it as if it was a political threat to America because of that. So, um, many Chicanx students and teachers were upset about this because this was one of the only classes they looked forward to, because it was the only thing that taught them about their culture and their people. Um, this was one of the only classes that they actually retained information from. And in response to this ban, many students, teachers, and the community together, they protested, they went to hearings, they even went to court to defend their history and the right to learn about their history, which is just kind of crazy that people have to fight to learn about themselves and their history. But so, in the end, the government was making education extremely political by passing this House bill, and which just shows how powerful the media and politics play, especially when it's directly affecting Latinx history and how it's portrayed in America. So, going off of that, how does the media affect Latinx people today? So, it still shapes how Latinx communities are perceived, understood, and treated by other countries all around the world, America included, and even themselves. So it influences politics, education, identities, and entertainment, as we spoke about in the Unified Farm Workers movement and the House bill banning ethnic studies in schools. It also instills these stereotypes into Latinx people because of how much they hear about them. Because when you frame the public opinion about a certain group of people, they will also start to adhere to these stereotypes and feel like they're actually true because it's the only opportunity they have. So, because of that, overall, the media has historically shaped how Latinx people see themselves. Starting from colonialism and political propaganda, Latinx people have been influenced by how they are perceived, which leads to seeing themselves as the media has placed them in society. So, conclusion. No matter what the setting is, media is one of the most powerful tools to convey information, whether it's positive or negative. Oh, that is not spelled right. Oops. Awkward. Anyways, so in the case of Latinx people, media usually throws them into a very negative light, especially in America, which affects how others see them and even how they see themselves. So, for hundreds of years, Latinx people have fought for their freedom and their rights just to be overthrown because of how powerful the people who control America's media are. I just cannot spell today. I am so sorry. Today, we have to challenge these narratives that media puts on Latinx people so that if these issues of representation, oppression, and racism don't continue. Because if they continue, it's going to be harder and harder to stop it, and it's already very difficult to make a change. So, these are my works cited. Thank you for listening to this video and watching it. I hope that this changed your perspective on the media and how badly it represents some communities and cultures. Yeah, thank you.